Hey everyone. How are you guys doing tonight? I did not play an intro because I was a little late getting started. So I hope you guys forgive me for that. But I have a really good show planned for you tonight. I'm not going to be here again. Steve from True Crime Web is my guest host, along with Hoosier Cold Case. And Hoosier Cold Cases is a good friend, and he always steps up to help out whenever he can. And I really appreciate both of them. Steve has been amazing. You guys that came over from his show earlier, wasn't that fantastic? I mean, he just did a great show. His knowledge and how he explains things and how law enforcement works and the way the criminalists look at crime scenes to me is just fascinating. I could listen to him talk about it and show us the experiments for hours. I find that so fascinating. So, anyway, they are going to be here tonight and talk about motive. And I think that motive is huge for this case. As Cop Faxx told us in one of his earlier videos in the last month, he talked about motive and how important it is for any case, but especially this case. He feels that once we get close to motive, we will have a good idea of who Bridge Guy is. So they're going to talk about that. And they're also going to talk about some of the things that have happened with the murder sheet in the last couple of days and some of the things that they've talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome all of you. Polygraph, hello. It's so good to see you. And Molly, thank you so much for becoming a member of my channel. I appreciate you so much. Hello, Never Silent. Thank you for being here. Jill Mosier, you're always welcome and good to see you. Hi, Deborah Edwards. Hey, Danger Dave. All of you guys who showed up tonight, all the new members, I so appreciate each and every one of you. I'm feeling a lot better, so thank you for all of your kind comments and people who have been asking about me. I appreciate it so much. I finally tested negative this morning for COVID, so that's good news. Now I just have to get over this extreme tiredness. Everything else with my heart is great, so I'm doing really good. So you guys, I plan on being back with you on Tuesday night. And I just wanted a few more days to recuperate from all of this. So without further ado, let me bring on, excuse me, let me bring on Steve and Hoosier. Everyone, please remain respectful to my guest hosts and please show them the same kindness that you always show me and everyone else. Behave in the chat as you know I would expect. And thank you for all my moderators for being here to moderate for me. I appreciate each and every one of you. Hey, Steve, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. And you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, Hoosier.
Hi.
Hi. So good
Thanks
to
for
have
having me
you.
on.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. I'm so glad that you guys are going to take my show and do your best. It's awesome.
We will try.
You'll do great, all of you.
I'll put that pressure on Steve. I'm just kidding.
You guys have got this. Without further ado, I'm going to leave you to it, and I will see you guys at the end.
All right. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you so much.
Well, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm all right, good sir. So what's your opinion on motive for this case?
Oh, man. No one could say it better than what Cop Faxx said when he did his take on the importance of motive, of his understanding and from his experience from law enforcement, that motive while it's not always necessary, but understanding that motive, that it is a great step towards identifying in more cases than not. And have you, just because you do have motive doesn't mean that you instantly know who the offender is. But like I said, it's a great step in that direction. How do you feel about it?
I used to think that the motive would only make sense to the killer. And these days, I think it's, I think he's a power control killer. And I think that there's a sexual aspect and a fantasy, highly fantasy driven. And regardless of who Bridge Guy actually is, I don't necessarily think it's one particular person. I just don't know. I can't rule out like Ron Logan. I can't rule out the Kleins, and I can't rule out that it's somebody else we don't even know about. So
it's very perceptive of you to realize that you can have multiple motives from a single offender. There's not always just it's a robbery. That he may have within his sickness and his fantasy multiple motives for when he had the interaction, such as with Libby and Abby. What was the ultimate one? And does law enforcement processing the crime scene? I think they have a far greater understanding. Of course, they have a far greater understanding because the profile's built from the crime scene. They know exactly what went on. They know what violence was used. They know what type of injuries were inflicted. Was there certain things that occurred that is singular and focused towards a certain point or expectation? These killers, they can be extremely driven towards a certain thing. But of the three that you said, you had power control, sexual aspect, and fantasy. Which one you think he relies upon more?
Fantasy.
Why is that?
I think it drives his life. So Kegan fits that very well in a way where his whole online persona, his whole life was just fantasy based. He wasn't a rapper. He wasn't a music producer. He didn't have a Rolex. He didn't have fast cars. He wasn't any of those things. But the fantasy part comes from my research. A lot of John Douglas, actually, and Ann Burgess and Robert Ressler, and their talks about the different kinds of killers. We don't know if there was explicit sexual happenings, right? But I still think even sometimes killers using a knife, that's the sexual part of it. And it just seems to me like there's rarely ever another reason for someone to murder teenage girls. I mean, they're not stealing millions of dollars or cheating on their husbands or, these kind of things. And so it's kind of like the statistically most probable is sexual fantasy type murder.
Now, do you think part of the abduction and first contact, stalking, targeting, when do you think that this started? When do you think the targeting of these two individuals actually began?
I used to think it was possible that the killer just went out there without a target in mind, but I don't think that anymore. I do think the stalking started much further, whether, again, like let's just say it's somebody who has never been named and we don't know who it is. And because we don't, but I think it's completely feasible that he was stalking them longer than just out at the bridge, maybe even just through Snapchat following them or something weird like that.
Okay. Now, after the targeting and and you said you think he's mostly fantasy driven, which with the fantasy driven, of course, you have the visual type of offender that, they fantasize about things and may memorialize with the photographs and maybe using the internet in so many different ways, because with certain addictions and stuff, everything's at finger touch now. You can just go out there.
Paraphilias and
you can just instantly get access to all this stuff. But do you think that the first contact and the abduction and the manner, which I found very impressive, of the control that you can hear in his voice, it wasn't one that was screaming, shouting. And I've heard people that, when you lose control, the higher your voice is, the more out of control you are. This individual wasn't in that manner. So I take it that he's a very controlled individual.
And he seemed to have brought things with him, had enough mind to take things away, potentially. We don't necessarily know that. I know they haven't used organized, disorganized since the 80s, but he seems quite organized. They didn't seem like a mental illness to where it was a split decision to harm them. Because the attack would have been more of a blitz style attack, and it would have been solved much quicker because there wouldn't have been maybe DNA cleanup or fingerprint cleanup or that preparedness or whatever. So it feels much more planned. Now, there could have been some mistakes made that let him get away this long. I don't necessarily subscribe to that too much. They did, the law enforcement's reaction, all of them that saw and know about this crime, like all the details, they seem extremely horrified by it. And that level, and then all the government agencies that got involved, leads me to believe they took this so seriously because something was so disturbing extra about this.
I know that's interesting.
So I just think.
I heard you mention that the other day that they don't use
Steve.
organized or disorganized since the 80s, but there may be certain agencies that don't, but that's not the case as far as training and law enforcement, because they trained us all the way up into the when I retired. They were still teaching that. So I don't know exactly which agency may or may not, but it still is a vital tool along the continuum of what type of victims and the victimology. And when you see these crime scenes that, there may be some agencies that don't, but there's still a large, because it was created by the FBI. And I think it's still in some years later.
I was talking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was created, but
the FBI moved on. Yeah.
Do what, sir?
Well, the Reed technique of interrogation is still used by a lot of police, and it's been proven completely ineffective, and a lot of false, confessions, and so there's more modern interrogation techniques. But some of the stuff is still taught to this day for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it sometimes people write off because, like I said, the FBI is one that really created a lot of that stuff, and during some of the CSI stuff and interrogations and all this stuff, there's so many good techniques of that, in the old ways. And of course we have advances constantly with law enforcement, and and hopefully it advances further and quicker now. We got all this CSI stuff, and everybody gets a confession in minutes, and sometimes that's not more times than not. And have I ever gotten a false confession? Actually, I did one time, and it was from an individual that had a lower IQ. I didn't. He just panicked and gave a confession, which of course it never went through the courts. It got thrown out of court for the fact that, and rightfully so, because some people will confess to anything, but once you find the evidence that says, no, that's not the case, then of course it's an easy out to get a false confession with some people, and which isn't right.
And sometimes people want the fame or the attention that goes along with it, so they'll falsely confess and things like that.
Oh yes, there's some strange people out there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
But so from the abduction point on this fantasy, do you think that part of his fantasy was taking control of the girls and escorting them to the final location, or do you think something happened and there was a flight that the girls took their shot at it?
That's a great question, and I like Ken Maines a lot. I trust his opinion a lot, and he thinks his professional opinion was a failed abduction, and so I don't know, right? I don't know if his plan was to murder or if something went wrong and he say the blunt force trauma thing is true. We don't know that, but it's been discussed. Maybe he subdued one and then kind of freaked out and then was like, well, now I have to kill them or something. It just went wrong. So those are details I would assume that only law enforcement knows what happened then. What do you think happened? Do you think it was planned to murder or something went wrong?
Once again, if you go along those fantasy rules, and was this part of his fantasy? And was he escorting them, feeding off their fear, their pleas, the conversations? Was he giving them a gap to, it depends on what type of predator he is. And if he is a certain type, you can see that he would thrive on that. But like I said, once again, we don't know what was at that crime scene. We don't know where the separation of the rumors or where the shoe and the phone was found, what the distances were, why that occurred, and did he take control of one? Did he ever lose control of one? And did he give them instructions to possibly run? We just don't know. There's so many troubling facts that we don't know that we have to look at. I had an interesting question here for you that was in chat for you. Let's see here. I'm not as good at this as if it was multiple predators, double rainbows, that's this. If it was multiple predators, the harder to keep their secret. So may I please ask your thoughts upon that? Do you think it was multiple offenders or single?
Well, I think a multiple offender scenario would answer a few questions, especially if it's, the current main thought on suspects. For like the captain and I went out, Captain Howdy, he and I went out to the bridge last weekend, and we're not in the prime of our life. We're over 40, and we, I work a desk job and stuff like that, but you tromping through the woods shouldn't be too bad, but it's treacherous. Now, could a farmer who runs a horse farm all day do that? Maybe, probably, regardless of his age. Could two lazy, chubby guys do it? I don't know. Maybe, especially if they're working together. And it seems to me like you have, from the witnesses that we hear online, now we have to be careful, of course, taking them too seriously, right? We can't take anything as fact except for what law enforcement or the family is telling us. I try not to. But one witness saw a person that was about her height at 5'6". One person saw a dark person out near the entrance to the private drive. That there's a gate and the private drive goes back through the woods there, and they ran him off. And so there's definitely been rumors that there were multiple, more than 2 sketches made. So what I think is there were 2 or 3, or maybe even maybe more, I doubt it, but 2 or 3 people out there that were dressed similar, that were creepy. Like, I know that sounds crazy when I say it out loud, and it might not be true at all, but it could be that, in Indiana here with Indiana packers and farmers and even the Baptist community, or not the Baptist, is it? They're not Mennonites, but they're
Amish.
They're not Amish and they're not Mennonites, but it's the same kind of community, and around the area, and everybody shops at the farm store, right? And buys their clothing at the farm store because it lasts longer or whatever. So this type of clothing is completely possible on a day like that. Now, man, we can go on some tangents, because was he overdressed for that day? Do you think he was overdressed for that day? The girls were out there, thin hoodie, and
Well, if he's targeting, he went for a reason, and if that was occurred, and he knew that meeting, he dressed for what he brought items for the end result that occurred.
I think so too. And
so, if he dressed accordingly to what would get him in and out, because you can look at the dress of Libby and Abby and see that it wasn't necessary to be that well dressed. It wasn't necessary to be your jacket enclosed and closed up. There's a lot of things that show that he may have dressed up for one purpose of either part of a ruse to be something he wasn't. And,
I've always thought a ruse was used to keep them under control for part of the abduction.
Does that fall into your fantasy part of it also?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So fantasy, in some individuals, fantasy is their only escape, right? All through childhood, even through a traumatic childhood, even teenage years. And the fantasy starts out to where they have control over a situation. That's why they fall back in the fantasy. And then eventually mixed with teenage sexuality, the fantasy starts taking on a different tone, and power and control within the sexual fantasy gets even darker. And then it can, we don't have the best research ever, because these kind of killers are often just straight liars. And because they're always trying to maintain control and the narrative. It's like Ted Bundy blaming his murders on pornography, which, sure, you can go with that, but at the same time, no, he did it because he wanted to. It wasn't because he watched porn. The violent porn was another aspect, I think, of his sadism, basically. But I think the clothing, there was probably purpose. Again, the preparation. If he brought a knife, if he brought a gun, if he had some kind of blunt force object. Somebody was asking. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, you can use both a knife and a weapon as a blunt force instrument.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So, the hilt of a knife, you strike somebody with it, or even a butt of a gun. There's so many different ways that you can do that. Or if you can bring another instrument, or, even it's not unknown for people that are running ruses not to even have handcuffs, and which can be another, instrument that is blunt force if you had to.
How do you Why do you think he crossed the creek?
I don't think that was his first choice. You don't abduct people without having a place to take them.
Right.
And I don't know at what point. I know that on the audio you can hear rocks and gravel or crunching. They said we don't know how far along that video or that audio it is. You know, they say it's 43 seconds, I think, and we don't have the full audio. And I don't know how long it takes to get down there to that bottom road. You do. Could you get to that lower road in 43 seconds?
I had to scoot down on my butt to get down that hill. Even if you go back further toward like the Haynes property or the Weber property, it's still real steep. And so, yeah, I mean, that when you go down from the south end to it takes you right to that gravel. So yeah, you could, because you're kind of running. I mean, you're kind of like going down, running down the side of that hill. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't take long. Okay. And then from there, it's really steep down to the like floodplain. But there's like a path that takes you down more gradual, that goes way to the north, and then you can like go around.
Well, and that's the thing about the crime scene. You know, if that is not a natural way to go to a crime scene, to cross a creek to an area you already set up.
If you go towards the shoe tree, it's way more secluded.
That's what I think, and I personally do think that there was another plan, and it's just a feeling that, like I said, you don't. Where was he going to take them? I think that if it was targeting and it was planned out, that and it wasn't just simple, I'm going to murder 2 innocent children today, and
right.
That there had to be some type of motivation, and that motive being the children, of course, that age group, and which fits within the profile of an individual that looked up that age group with a lot of pornography and everything, and had contact with them that day. And that's one thing that really interests me, for the fact that of all the people that we've ever talked to him that day, he does have a reason that if certain things occurred, he would have a motive. And I look at him strongly for that reason. But I don't think crossing the creek was the first plan. I think getting down to the road was, and then we either have a choice of possibly a isolated house or barn or area to take them that is unoccupied, having local knowledge, or going the other way. It just doesn't seem reasonable that crossing the creek to commit a crime is what his first intention was.
I'm really fascinated by the animal hair mentioned in the Ron Logan search warrant affidavit. How does an animal come into play? Like, it's very strange. Yeah, Ron Logan had horses. Maybe there was some horsehair, but they wouldn't have. I don't think they would have cared about that unless it was like on top of one of the girls or on their clothing or something.
It could come from cross contamination. It could be that either the girls had contaminated themselves earlier with another animal, or riding in a vehicle with, because if it's animal hair, how long does animal hair last? It can last.
I have cat hair on me now. Yeah. My kid.
And so, and then again, you also have that the offender, whatever his environment is, because he brought his environment of where he lives.
And that's where I would assume that the police assume it is where it came from, because they would have vetted,
yes,
everywhere the girls were already.
Mm-hmm. And so when you look at, and that's where it would, obviously there's animal hair there. Is it what kind of animal?
right?
dog, cat.
They can do DNA testing on that and figure
Yes.
out the animal. Yeah.
And there's indicators it's dog for the fact that they went and have taken dogs from
Right.
one of I think it was Kagan's. I think it was Tony's dog, maybe.
That would lead me to believe that the offender knew that they could get down to that area from either the cemetery, Ron Logan's property, or the road, 300. Because to bring a dog down there is why, unless they had to. I'm not sure.
I mean, could it be part of a ruse? Could it be an intimidation factor of a co-offender? Don't know.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point.
We
have a dog
another
across
question
the
here. You haven't been in the area, and I'm not going to get there for another week or two, in which I'd love to meet and talk to you when I'm there. What do you think about the bodies not being found sooner on that first evening?
So when you're at the north end of the bridge, as you're like 100 feet or less from the end of the very start of the bridge on the north end, there's an obvious trail that goes off and through the woods and along the sheer cliff all the way. I find it hard to believe that no one would just walk through there and look through those woods. And I don't exactly know where the crime scene is, but there, like the captain showed in his video, there's some evidence that indicates the location. We tried comparing like the crime scene tape photos that Alexis McAdams did and put on her Twitter, and it's changed a little bit. New trees and saplings and dead wood move, things like that. So it's hard to get it exactly, but also the coordinates seem pretty accurate. So it's not like it's super hidden. I haven't gone to the Weber's house and looked out their, side window to see if you can see down to the crime scene clearly, but people seem to think that's true. And I don't know. It's very strange. And then Ron Logan receiving text messages in the middle of the night and the phone being in the approximate location of those bodies. It's not clear enough about if it was GPS, if it was, if they used triangulation with towers, what data came through. So the search warrant affidavit just says approximate location, right?
Yeah. So there's so much embellishment in that search warrant that, I mean, I've never seen a search warrant that was that for probable cause, you most certainly didn't need all that information, but it appears driving a narrative.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't look at too many affidavits, and so your opinion on that is good to hear. You thought it was just way more detailed than you'd normally have?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if they had all that, I mean, what if you sat on a jury and who wouldn't believe all that and think that,
right,
all we need now is just one piece of evidence, and it appears that they weren't able to find that one piece of evidence, and so it deepened the mystery, and it also will put a burden that if it is anyone other than, then they will always bring that up in court. This is what the FBI believed at this time, and why do we think different now? And so
that's a good point.
Yeah.
It could make the prosecution much more difficult.
Well, all of this will. Everything that's come out with a lot of these creators, all of it's going to make it a lot difficult than what it was or needed to be. Because like I was discussing last night, with the transcripts being released and being common knowledge of and understanding that from that transcript, you could see where there might be motive by certain individuals. But that's common knowledge now about where people were at and who might be involved, and speculating about certain information that if law enforcement, if those transcripts had never been released and someone came to them and told them certain information that, hey, so-and-so was up on North Country Road that day, and they said this to me. You see, that can never be, now, Kagan can do whatever he wants to with it. So we lost some ability to carry and give certain weight to information that anyone, such as what was recently brought up by a third outsider, that Kagan has confessed to him, that that information is common knowledge now, and he could have obtained it from the transcripts. And so you lose some value to law enforcement.
Yeah, I could see Kagan just trying to save his own ass from jail.
Well, like you said, he lives in his own fantasy world. It's nothing to him. I mean, you've got a man that says he's never talked to a child or a woman in his life, or female. They didn't want to see a nude picture of her. I mean, how deprived of mental capacity is he? I mean, he is a sick person.
Yes. I saw someone ask about if maybe the murder sheets are working with law enforcement, like it's an intentional leak of information to glean new information. Have you ever worked a case where they released information to the press purposefully, like leaked it?
They always do, yes. And you do it sometimes for the purpose that you want to revigorate the case. You'll do it on anniversaries. You'll do it when you might identify a certain person of interest to see the reaction. So it can be done, and it will be done. And is there a strategy behind it? At times there is. So it's not impossible. Now, them saying they work, and that they always make reference that they clear with law enforcement prior to doing these releases. I'd like to know who that law enforcement officer is that says, yes, y'all release this, because he's on public time and he's working for the people of Indiana. And I think people of Indiana deserves to know who the officer is that's saying, yeah, that information is okay to release. And because I find it odd that it's continuously them doing that and saying that.
So are you familiar with Lee Kerr?
I've seen some mention, and I've seen some of I think either on Reddit or on some of the shows where people have put these little quips or clips of what was said.
So they release information in such a strange way to where they force everyone else to ask questions and then they'll answer it, instead of just putting out information that would help catch a person. They're like, ask me a question and then I'll answer it if I can. And I find that so weird that I theorize that potentially Lee Kerr is a planned police endorsed type of leak session to do what you were talking about. And I can't come up with any other reason why someone, I don't know if you know much. Let me look this up.
While you look that up, I'm going to ask Harris about murder sheet releasing or leaking being done at direction of law enforcement officials. If it's part of the strategy, it is a possibility. So no, we can't deny or say that no, they wouldn't do this, because there is a possibility it is. Would they do it just through the same creators, I don't think so. And I think they would do it with a far greater audience than just what the podcast was. I think all our dealings was either with the local newspapers or local media. It wasn't with, but of course we didn't have the strength and the power of the internet back then either. So it's a different generational thing, but still with the way that the news media is, that if you was wanting the masses to know, you would leak it to a larger audience.
So you would think they would use like Dr. Phil or HLN or something like that, and not
Yes.
Reddit or Facebook.
Yes, yes. Because you get, those people are on, all the ones that are focused on it, that they live it, and they day in and day out, it's looking at this case. And so you have a fixed audience. If you want the masses and you want everyone to get that outside tip from the unknowns, you're going, like when they do the news, like 2019, when Carter came out, could that have been released through MS back then? Sure. But Carter went on TV and on the news, and he goes on the news constantly, or has over the years, and done these interviews and revealed what he wants to reveal. And so he has access to them. They understand it. Behavioral science units understand it. They know how to release information at key times, in key directions, and with the right people to get a certain audience.
But I think in the modern world that they could potentially get the killer to reply on social media and give away information that he shouldn't know.
Oh, they've tried. There's no doubt. I mean, when you watch Carter as he speaks, and he's trying, do they know what the motive is for it? But they understand the personality of it.
But how would somebody react? They would turn to the YouTube or the I mean, if you go on national news and you say a certain thing, and it's much harder for a killer to write a comment on it or whatever and then monitor that. Whereas in Facebook, you do a post and the killer could potentially, because I think do you think that the killer's in these groups somewhere like Facebook or Reddit or YouTube or something?
Carter says he's watching it, so yes.
Yeah.
But to that end is that you have to look at the Washington, the snipers. They were communicating with law enforcement.
DC snipers,
and they were doing it through the news. BTK did the same thing through the news groups. So sometimes, yeah.
I mean, it was a different time of the world, also.
Yeah, it was, but it's still not that. BTK has taught with his capture to stay away from the internet.
Yeah, I mean, don't use the church computer with your sign in.
Yeah, you stay away from the computer systems, and so that was the bad part that came out of BTK.
But if this killer was stalking these girls through the internet, then it would make sense that he's kind of
it's possible
on the internet.
And did he? And that's is a possibility. And do they have it? They don't have the further. Do they have? They don't have the last key piece, as Carter and them keep saying. We need that one tip. And like I've always said, there's not a case I couldn't have solved without the one tip. If it's the right one, it's solved. And
they won't know it until they hear it, is what he said. Yeah. And most likely it'll be well, they thought initially it would be like somebody who, I mean, okay. Here's what I think people should think back on if they suspect their partner or don't. It's like that Monday, after trudging through those woods, I had to recover for like 3 days. I had muscles on the inner wall of my chest hurt, and because I was carrying equipment and stuff. Like this guy, even if he was young, like my son went with me and he's 14, so it didn't bother him at all. But somebody in their late 20s, 30s, 40s. The older this killer is, the more likely he would have been in pain or recovery, like his legs hurt or those kind of things days after. So it's like maybe something like that could trigger somebody's memory of the days after a murder.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends upon the relationship that BG has with the significant
with everyone. Yeah.
Because
he might be a loner.
Or he could be a absolutely dominating abuser.
Yeah.
That everyone in his life is absolutely fearful of his interactions with them. They're scared to death of him, and they may never come forward until after he's met his demise. So there's a lot of different things out there. And did law enforcement try to tempt him and to try and communicate? Yes, may have. Have they tried to get the family to communicate? Yes. I'm absolutely sure that there's some key statements in there that when you look at those news releases, that those are the ones that they pleading to and trying to get those people to step forward. And will they? Hopefully so. But and have they? And there's a possibility that the person that with that key one piece of information has already reported it. It's just lost in the mix.
Well, what they do is when a piece of information comes in, they put it in a database, and then the database is using like keyword searches and pattern matching. It's called Odyssey. The FBI is letting them use it. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's neat and it's great, but that doesn't mean that
but you're right. It could miss the important tip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And without a human looking at all of these.
Yeah. Because you may get a tip and from the recording or the inflection of the voice that, you're reading words or you're seeing data on a sheet. And just like the transcripts, we don't know how those questions were asked. We don't know the pitches and the inflections of the tones of the answers and the questions from reading it. And so a lot of times these programs and that's one thing I hate about that. I love hearing the actual phone calls and the tips and speaking to them and letting humans get this. And I just think it's important, but that's old school. They may have a better way than I.
It might just be due to the sheer number of tips that they couldn't get the manpower to handle that many, and so they had to use this system.
Here's a question. So is all the non-secular stuff part of the fantasy?
I would think so, or it was to throw off investigators.
That is that you ever been a cop, because that's exactly what my boss would have told me. Is either to throw us off or it's part of this fantasy. But you're exactly right, and that's the thing about that. When you look at staging and look at some of this stuff, what does it mean? Is some of this signature or is it staging? Is this posing? What is it? And only the ones that actually see that scene know. And it's not all of them that saw the scene, because they can misunderstand it. It takes people of certain stature, like Cop Faxx, man that worked many cases. Lou Smith, those people. It's that type of individuals that understand them, to such
Joe
a great extent.
My favorite.
Do what?
Joe Kinda, he's my favorite.
Same.
It's awesome.
Yes, but there's a lot to be said for that generation of investigators and that has that hand-on approach and understanding of
I still believe that the human investigator is always going to be better than relying on technology. because computers aren't to the point of better than the human mind yet. And like a seasoned officer, like you're saying, someone who's done this a lot is gonna have much better insight than pretty much anything.
Yeah, because when you do a keystroke, it may not be the keystroke that you want to do and relaying the information. At some point, would that be? I believe so. And I don't know what level they're at now with this IA, and is it advanced that far? It's making great leaps and bounds, but this artificial intelligence, I just don't know.
Maybe eventually, yeah. So, America True Crime asked about psych profile. This guy has held it together for almost 6 years to not screw up. It's, I still think there's a little bit of luck, but also like such a big case with so many investigators. I would almost, psychopathy isn't in the DSM-5 or anything, but it would almost seem to be able to not give away clues. They would have to be a tremendous liar and extremely under control of their emotions.
Well, you say, I think it's longer than 6 years. He was a killer prior to, regardless if he had committed the acts or not, he was a killer prior to February 13th. And he's a killer now. He has that potential.
Do you think this was his first? Oh, he had the potential. Do you think this was his first crime, like murder?
With the amount of control,
yeah,
I would think not. If he hadn't killed before, he'd come very close to it.
Or maybe a rapist even.
Yes, that he was a violent offender that can control victims, and has a history of that. Is those victims within his family? Do what, sir?
I was just saying, like, I've said that, but I don't have your experience, and it's good to have a little bit of validation about that, because I don't think you don't just go from 0 to 100 like that.
It's very, very rare. I mean, not all offenders are psychopaths. You can have emotional breakdown, whereas a perfectly normal person has that moment of anger and has a mental break. But it's very, very, it's nowhere near as what if you're a psychopath, there's a certain mathematical formula that you're at higher risk of committing murder than not. But not all psychopaths kill.
Correct. Yeah. My kitty wants in the frame. Okay. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I just Doug Carter said they're confident he's told somebody what he's done. Do you agree with that?
I think someone knows, regardless if he told them. He either told them through behavioral cues, destruction of property, or I think people realize what he's done, but why haven't they come forward? Are they
just scared?
Co-offenders? Are they fearful?
Co-offenders, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because when Carter, there's a lot of strange conversations and news briefings and things released and words said from the shack. What do you think about the shack?
I think it was certainly calculated to include that. He was reading from a sheet, everything he said. As far as the meaning of it, I honestly think that they were trying to appeal. I mean, obviously they said they're trying to appeal to the little bit of conscience he has left, which makes me think the non-secular items, they were hoping they could leverage that in some manner to get him to turn himself in or something.
Yeah, it could have been a shot in the dark. or it could have been a shot at another co-offender. If they had evidence of a second if they had evidence of a second individual there that possibly didn't know the severity of what was about to happen or was going to go there, which I don't understand that even being part of if you go there with carrying what he carried that day, it seems natural that he knew what was going to happen that day.
Kind of like a rape kit or a kill kit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And let's see, there was a question about that. If the crime had occurred 20 feet from Logan's property, would he have still been a person of interest? Yes.
Yeah. He showed up on camera the next day wearing extraordinarily similar to what BG's wearing. I mean, it's too pixelated to tell if it's like an exact match or anything like that, but it's similar.
Yeah.
He had a blue coat with a hoodie with a hat.
Well, nobody at the time other than I think one witness had described him that accurately, and I don't think that was out at the time. And but I
had a hard time in the search warrant affidavit. He told his cousin a very specific time frame, and that stood out to me quite a bit. Now, the 11 o'clock news and the 6 a.m. news, because he called his cousin at 9:20 a.m. on the 14th. But the late, maybe even 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and the 6 a.m. news could have mentioned the time frame they went missing. And so that's where he got the idea of the time frame he needed to give his cousin. But it is strange. Now, could the Kleins and Logan both been involved in some weird way? Sure. I think it's possible.
Well,
if they're old friends, or he's like, I screwed up, like, I'm just theorizing. I no clue.
Well, I know.
Say Tony's like, hey, I need your help, Ron.
Yeah.
Like,
I always felt about the revelation of him getting that alibi or asking for the alibi. I put that more along that he may have been out and had looked for the children, and he may have come across them and panicked that, I'm going to be blamed. This is my property.
I don't disagree with that one either.
I'm a felon. I have a history of abusing women, and
they're going to try to pin this on me, type thing. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's facts or not, but that's just a feeling I have about it that evidently the FBI couldn't overcome either. If they could have, they would have.
So supposedly there were what's the word when the blood pools? It creates.
You have there's all different types. You got passive blood pools. You have
like inside the body.
Oh, you lividity.
Lividity. So there were. The way the girls' lividity lined up, it looked like they had laid in one position in a sexual tableau for a certain amount of time because of the way it lined up, and then were later moved. And
that takes a while.
Yes.
So
like 7-8 hours, would that make sense?
Well, I mean, it depends a lot about other outside elements. Yes. I mean, there's so much to it: ground temp, insulations, clothing, body cooling. But that I hadn't heard that before. That's the first time I've heard that.
There's been certain documents leaked, things. Now to me, it's all third person, fourth person now. I can't. It's just like some of the other stuff. There's been a million rumors, dolls and bed sheets with words on it, and things carved into trees, things carved into the girls. I try to stick with things, but this particular one is reliable in a lot of ways. So You know, and a lot of people don't understand why the bodies weren't found the first night. But it, you know, something it gets dark here at like 5:30, 6:30, maybe at the latest in February. Those woods are actually pretty huge. If you go down the 505, it's massive. Plenty of spots to look and for searchers to spread out. And the searchers weren't just wandering around those woods. It was an organized search by the police and fire department. So
I would expect that law enforcement will went back to each search team and said, show me the route you took. Show me exactly where you went.
Yeah.
Show me where you were at.
They'd want to document everything. Absolutely.
Yes. And I don't know if that was done.
Especially when they figured out that the crime scene actually started at the south end of the bridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I mean, I just don't know. I would think that'd be a natural part of the investigation for whether it's best. And also the drone pilot. Where did you fly the drone? Show me the footage. If
he didn't have footage, so it's as good as not even having that conversation. Yeah. He didn't record it that night. He was just flying it to see if, if he could see him in the water. But it's a tragedy that he didn't record it.
And actually, I'm going to be going, and like I said, I got my drone, and I'm going to record. Although I know that the leaves are not. Hopefully, they'll be thinner by then.
They will. They will.
Are they dropping pretty good up there right now?
Yes, they are. Plenty. I'm already raking and blowing with the blower thing. So. Okay.
Hopefully there'll be at least 50 to 75% gone by the time I get up there during that period because I'd like to get some good, interesting video.
It is better to do the video, and if you're traveling this, any distance to get here, to come during, when it isn't so filled with foliage. So,
well, unfortunately, I'm having to work some other cold cases, and so as I work with the families, we were on a timeline with them, and so I had to do that, and I'm working with them, and after that, while I was there, I'm driving hundreds of miles, so while I'm there, I might as well take care of this also the best, and I can always go back.
Have you ever had a situation where you were talking to someone or comments left on your channel and it just gave you a vibe, like your police spidey sense perked up and you had to tip it in?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Wow, just got your spidey senses going?
No.
Show it to me.
You were talking about still working other cold cases, and
mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking about, like, when you're working cold cases, and especially a cold case where you're going back and re-interviewing people years later, lots of years later sometimes. It's like, I just curious about, do you just get that feeling sometimes? Do you try to stay away from rumors as much as possible around cold cases and just get the case documents and then start there, or do you listen to it all?
You have to listen to it all, because sometimes a rumor is a lot of, even in lies, there's some truth. And for it to be a believable lie, there has to be truth within it. And then some of the rumors, you have some that's absolutely ridiculous, but you weigh them and you move on, and hopefully with enough data and enough information, you stay on the right path, because crazy people can be witnesses.
True.
And so,
you ever been standing there talking to a person, you're like, oh my God, this is the killer?
Oh, actually, yes, I have talked to killers before, and weigh in the is he confessing, or is he giving me his thoughts about what possibly could have happened? And you have to be very, when you're doing security on some of these cases and stuff, and there's people in court that they're facing life, and in some cases they're facing death penalty unless the attorney can convince a jury not to send them to the chair. Here in Georgia, I don't know what Indiana's is, but
when I first started my channel, I would like go to Delphi and like the Bacon Festival or something. And as I'd walk around, I'd just be looking at people and I was like, is anybody acting funny or reacting strange to my It's not like I'm ever been a huge channel or anything, but like under the premise that this guy's probably watching all this stuff about him. And I don't know. It's creepy. It's real creepy doing that. And I mean, but when it's your job, I'm sure it's still as creepy.
Nah. You get paid to do for it. You're protected. You got, you're going to do your job. I've never worried about, I've never been fearful of another person that, when you take the job that you're going to protect the public is before you. And so, so you go out there and you put yourself in harm's way and you do your job.
I work in computer security and forensics, and we have government, education, hospital, all kinds of different companies under us. But yeah, it's not, our investigations aren't quite like that. There's no people involved usually. And if the FBI ever needs to get involved, we would just hand off stuff to them and see you guys later. But
we're reading through here, so if we got any more good questions. I don't know how, and everybody give Kristen a thumbs up and support her every way that you can. Subscribe. We've gone too long without saying that. And
well, that's good looking out, Steve. One of the things that Kristen wanted us to bring up was the Murder Sheet's newest kind of revelation about the searches in the water in Peru and how it didn't yield a murder weapon or anything significant. My feelings on that are that sucks. I'm disappointed.
Well, how do you know? I mean, did they not find anything? I mean,
how do they know?
How long does it take lab work to work? I mean,
Good
who
point.
are you basing it on?
They might have been told that, maybe they figured out their contact and they told the contact, we didn't find anything or something, keeping it quiet, or we really don't know. Yeah.
And sending stuff to a crime lab, if it's high profile, of course, they can get things moved up, but you can only work as fast as whatever the forensics, about whatever you're doing on the computer world, that how long does it take to go in and recover whatever information you're looking for? What are the steps needed?
It takes a lot of hours, and up to a week or two, even a month sometimes, for a simple breach. So yeah.
Lynn, thank you for the donation there to Kristen. She appreciates that. And it says, would like to hear what you think about the DNA. Thank you. You have any thoughts on what DNA they have?
I've heard that they were working with Parabon. And it's like they've never committed a crime before. That specific comment makes me think they have sufficient DNA, and they just haven't matched it with anyone yet. And they are working with a genetic genealogy company. So
those are the most fascinating investigators, that if all crimes was investigated the way that they do that genealogy, they wouldn't be many unsolved crimes, because those people can link the smallest clues together and
it's hard.
It's
amazing. Really tough. I have attempted it before. And they use like newspapers.com and obituaries, and there's just old census data. and they can start from like, you know, third cousins, fourth cousins sometimes, and then hone it in. So it is amazing.
Trying to catch up with the questions again. Thank everybody for being here, y'all. Means a lot to us and to Kristen, and we still have her in our thoughts and prayers. And she looked wonderful tonight. She felt and sounded great, and I can't wait to hear her back on the air.
I appreciate your time, Steve. It was a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to chat about, or?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but whatever you got, tell us what you got planned on your next. Are you still going to be working on Delphi, or you got other things you're working on?
Delphi well, my channel is more about like, how could you identify the killer if you were living with them, kind of like BTK and his wife. Like what little cracks or little things, or because certainly, when she found him like hanging himself with a weird mask on and women's clothes and masturbating, that's probably a red flag a little bit. But he's like, I'm sorry, honey, I'll go to church more. And he did. But then, he was out like killing people's dogs because he could, even, he was technically within the letter of the law, but he was being extremely cruel. And because he was a member of the church, they didn't really listen to him. It's like, but there's like the psychology of these kinds of people. They're chameleons. They hide among us. And that's what I think Bridge Guy obviously has to be for survival over these past 6 years.
Well, and like I said, you have a dominating psychopath, and his relationship with his loved ones is not the relationship that the world sees. Now, some of the family and some of the children and neighbors, they may think they may have a strange relationship, but they don't know the true horrors of what's going on in that household.
Dennis Rader called it cubing, where he had like these different personalities and he just switched to one depending on the situation. Mm-hmm. And when it was time to be a sadist murderer, he just switched to that personality, and it was no problem for him.
Well, and now his understanding of how he acted may be true, but I'm sure that there are certain times that the outside world saw that. Yeah,
I think the same thing. There were sometimes it comes through the cracks for sure.
Yeah, that absolutely. I give on the score of serial killers, absolutely. BTK was almost, if he had the modern technology, DNA was going to get him. He never knew it was. Eventually, DNA was going to get him. And just like it'll get Zodiac, it'll get all these others. It will all the older ones where there is DNA, just like it got the Golden State killer. Most of these others, my fear is the next generations of these super killers that are coming along that are better educated, and the ones that are driven by the fantasies, they're still going to get caught. They can't, they're driven towards a certain means.
They can't deviate from their fantasy. It won't. It won't quench their thirst otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. But for the ones that are doing it for power and thrills, they will be hard to, and they may already exist. We just don't know it. And they probably do exist. We just don't know it.
So before the show, you were talking about my interesting thoughts on police, and most of those thoughts come from this book I recently read called How to Solve a Cold Case. And he's an ex-cop himself, and he runs the Murder Accountability Project. And they predict serial killers based on unsolved killings and like hotspots.
Mhm.
And he was talking about how serial killers are hiding these days in the opioid epidemic
Mhm.
and fentanyl. So, like I think what you were hearing was me talking about how, like, if somebody's a drug addict, their case will often get completely overlooked or
Mhm.
not even cared about much. And I think it's important
It is.
to not do that. There needs to be more funding, more training, whatever we need to do. The military gets a lot of money, like more money than anything. Maybe there should be more of that towards our officers also
Yeah. Yeah.
in their
Oh,
training.
yeah. And I saw the beginning, because prior to the states coming in and FBI and everybody getting this new CSI and the becoming certified and understanding certain things about crimes, it's moved a long way in the last 30 years, but it
Yeah.
needs to move. And you're right, the social economic status of victims plays a long part. That if you have the money and you have the political pull, you're going to be far ahead of the up the line. And if you're just someone of not having that being up on the ladder, that there is and is it fair? No. Should we do better? Yes. I also want to thank Tamara here, $10 super sticker. Thank you for supporting.
Good night, Curtis. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, the solve rate in the United States is it's like 50-50. And I understand how difficult it is, especially with juries these days who, because of television, and the writer of the book talks about this quite a bit, actually. Everybody goes into a jury thinking there's blood and semen all over everything. And it's just not true. And like every crime pre-television crime drama was solved with circumstantial evidence. And so the importance of circumstantial evidence and the general knowledge of the public and juries is important. We have to. There should be maybe even a little bit of training or deprogramming with jury selection, things like that. I'm sure they do to some extent, but
well, I know the solve rate, and I saw a couple articles and theories about that used to a higher percentage of crimes were solved compared to current. But a lot of that may play up, because generations past, there was a time that when you was arrested, if a lawman and if who word would you take? Would you take a police officer and the DA's word over a suspect? And that there was a time that if you was on trial and a jury was there, they was going to put somebody in prison. And they trusted law enforcement to a far greater extent. And officers were held to they were higher within the public's eye, and the DAs were. And that's not the case anymore. And juries are more critical of the evidence now than they were 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the Stanford research, they did the studies on the effects of authority on humans, and there's been a lot of research in this. And even good people sometimes can turn too authoritarian sometimes, or it can affect people in different ways. I mean, cops are lied to all day, every day. And that's tough to filter out, I'm sure. But I can't even imagine. But also, there are psychopaths who are drawn to power and control and find it in law enforcement too. And they're not doing like extensive psych tests, especially in smaller towns, things like that.
You're talking about for LE? For law
Yes,
enforcement?
for law enforcement.
And I saw the transition of that. When I first went in law enforcement, nobody even knew what a psych test was. You was hired on whatever your principal were, and whatever your connections with the community was, and military services, and there was a lot of things, and they run the background. And I worked for a man that if you had a speeding ticket, he wouldn't hire you. He said, if you don't respect the law enough to go the speed limit, I don't want you for me. And
also, law enforcement right now is in a shortage, which is unfortunate, but
well, and the public's outlook and the interaction they're having, is, where is it going to go? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I think we can do better as a society, of course, but we had an officer. He was a new officer that joined our local Lafayette police force. And then the mayor was sent evidence that this guy was actually like a white supremacist, and they were infiltrating on purpose. And they took that evidence, they investigated, and then they fired him. And which is he more radicalized now, or did he learn his lesson? Probably more radical now, but it's scary to think about that's a possibility where like Joe Kinda seems he has the biggest heart, and you, from what I've observed of you also, like, and Ken Maines especially, like, there's people who just want to help society and contribute and be a part of that solution. And those are always the best cops. And we're lucky to have people like you. You know what I mean?
I worked with some great men, and women. They would do anything to get the job done and do it right. And, but then again, like I said, I worked with some idiots too. And I saw people throw their whole career away for some stupid thing and serve federal time. And just crazy. But here's a question from Mrs. Thing 65 about are you the sleepover? Do you think that is an important part of the story?
Is that the weekend before?
I believe so. Is the one they're talking about.
Because isn't that the same girl that had the window peeper?
I believe so.
I do. There's so a child murderer would, BTK started out as a peeper, I think, didn't he? They start out as peepers, rapists, fire starters. I think it's okay, and let me know what you think. I think it's okay to compare Bridge Guy to like serial killers, because I think this guy is like that level of screwed up.
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. This guy, when you kill multiple victims, it ain't like, oh, I lost my head for just a second and I killed one. He went and did it twice. It's not something, that,
that's a real conscious decision at that point. Yeah.
Yes. And so he's an extremely violent individual. And not only that, but he abducted both of them.
Right.
And transported them from one location to another. And was that the final location he had planned? That's going to be debated until they find him.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the great conversation, Steve.
Oh, it has been great. Are you going to send her a text, or you want me to send her one?
I'll text her.
Yeah, because I'm going to go through the questions a little bit more here, see if I find one. I'm
right.
Sorry, guys, if I missed your questions tonight. The other night, I was absolutely overwhelmed, and I'm so glad that Hoosier came on and took some of the time away so I could go through this a little bit better.
I actually, I went one time to Delphi and went to the church there that Tobe goes to. He was sitting in the early service. I was sitting in there, and I grew up Methodist, so it wasn't anything weird to me. And they were giving me some dirty looks. I think they knew who I was, but I was just being peaceful and things, because at one point I thought, this guy's probably just in this community. I like, my grandparents are buried in the cemetery there. My entire life we would go to Delphi and visit my grandma and grandpa and my uncle and my cousins. And my whole family's from the Lafayette area, Delphi, surrounding towns. And then right before I was born, my dad got a job in Fort Wayne. And so I lived there my first 18 years. And then moved back here to help my grandma and things. So like, when this case came out, it was so, I'd always kind of watched movies and shows about serial killers and read some things here and there. But I was at work when they went missing, and a friend of mine that I worked with was a volunteer firefighter. And so like, he was telling me about stuff, because apparently word travels fast through firefighters. And ever since then, I've just been fascinated is kind of the wrong word, but it's the right word. And I don't know. I wish this would get solved and the community feel safe again.
Molly comes on and says, what is Parabon? If you want to explain to her what that is. Oh, there she is.
Parabon they're a company who takes DNA and then can create like an image of what that person probably looked like based on all the data in DNA. And it's been used multiple times to help solve cases. I've even theorized that maybe the Young sketch was from the returned Parabon data. But then you have Master Trooper Taylor Bryant saying he drew it just a couple days after the murder. So who knows? The police do, but we don't.
Hey, you guys.
There's the lady of the hour. Glad to see you.
How are you?
Doing great.
You guys are amazing. You guys are amazing.
Because I enjoyed talking to him. He's a very intelligent, interesting young man.
He certainly is. And you guys have 184 people watching you.
Good.
Not bad.
I didn't know. I had no idea.
I wanted you guys to know. I mean, you guys are hitting it out of the park. They just love listening to you talk. And I do too. I had to admit.
Well, it's all about Hoosier then, because it's not me.
No, it's Steve.
That's not true. Now you know better.
I'm very lucky to get to be able to ask you these questions, Steve, and kind of dig into your mind. Nobody gets to do that often. So that was amazing. It really was.
I had a great time. Me and my wife, if anyone ever heard us at the dinner table, they would think, what type of relationship is what are they talking about?
My wife doesn't want to know. She's like, it affects her deeply, like a normal person. Sorry.
No, my wife is not. No.
Lynette Joy said, look at that. Found some spare change in the bottom of my purse. Thanks for having HCC on. What a brilliant mind. I couldn't agree with you more. He's brilliant for sure. I'm very, very lucky to call him my friend. I feel the same about you, Steve, and Mrs. Steve. You guys are amazing. And I am so anxious to see and hear from you after you get out on the road and see how things are going for you. We wish you all the best in everything that you're doing for these families, because it's incredible. Not everyone has the ability or the desire to do what you're going to be doing. And
well, and as Hoosier brought up, that's one of the reasons we came up with the Cyclops system is that so that people can look at the teenage and the young children of looking at these clusters and possibly of identifying a serial offender, even with the more recent cases, where it was so hard when when I first became aware of the true crime world and was going in there trying to look at because I've really focused on the younger, most vulnerable part of our society. And it was so hard to find these victims, and that's how come we did that. And I have to thank, I have some wonderful volunteers, and my wife works so hard putting that. She gets depressed sometimes putting all that information in, but it's necessary.
It is depressing. And if I could hug her, I would, because it's really amazing to sit and have to put all of those cases in like that and see what those poor children have gone through and how their
so many missing. I mean, thousands are missing.
And all the missing children, yes, for sure. I mean, the parents, I think, is what gets me is the parents and how they have to go on day to day not knowing where their child is and what happened to them. And it's just heartbreaking is not even really the word. It goes so far beyond that. But you guys, thank you so much for taking care of my community so well and being here for me tonight. Just amazing. I just love you both. I can't say enough about it.
Well, I'll get out of your hair and let you close out your show. And it's been an honor, and I appreciate it. And I've got a busy week. But let me know if I can do anything else for you. And you take care of yourself. And I'm looking forward to relaxing with my coffee after my shows, listening to you, because you have a brilliant mind. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, Hoosier.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
I'll talk to you both later.
Bye.
Bye. So there you go, guys. What a great evening. I'm so happy that they were here. They're awesome men, and they have such great insight on this case and other cases as well. And I'm lucky to have them as my friends. And I appreciate all of you who've come over from Hoosier's community as well as Steve's community. I thank you all so much for being here. I am feeling better, and so I will be back on Tuesday night. And I love you too, Daisy. I love you guys. And I really miss being here, honestly. And so I'll be back. The other thing that I wanted to say real quick was make sure that you check out their channels if you're in my community and you've never ventured over there. Please make sure you do check them out. Also, I noticed that there's going to be a really interesting live stream tomorrow night on Sunny Justice's channel. And you guys might want to check that out because she's going to have Alex Voorhees on. And he has a lot of information. So I wanted to give that a little bit of a speak for her, because I definitely think that is going to be a good one to watch. So I will be back. Hey, John, good to see you. And Maria, I love you all. And Jennifer. So I'm going to close it out and say goodnight to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Please press the subscribe and like button. That keeps my videos up into the algorithm in YouTube so people find out about my channel. Candace West, thank you so much for your super sticker. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much for supporting my channel. Yeah, Daisy, I think Adam's amazing. I love Adam. He's a really great guy too. He's super sweet. But anyway, I am doing better and I feel better. So, yes, Fig Sauls did did a great interview with Alex. I'm really anxious to see him live on Sunny's show. So I think it will be a great interview. So I'm anxious to watch. But good night, everyone, and have a good rest of your weekend. Please be safe out there, and please be kind to everyone. It doesn't take anything to be kind to one another. And I will see you all on Tuesday night. Thank you so much.